BYD's new Seal08 is the car that has engineers in Munich and Detroit standing over a lift right now, staring at the underside of something that should not exist. Not a concept, not a prototype, a production sedan going on sale for less than $30,000, carrying hardware that German automakers have spent decades treating as a six-figure luxury upgrade. A car long enough to sit next to a BMW 5 Series that somehow turns tighter than a Volkswagen Golf. A plug-in hybrid that can drive from Paris to Rome without stopping once for fuel or a charger. And it comes from a company most Western car buyers still describe, lazily, as just another Chinese EV maker. The number in the title isn't a rounding trick, it's real. 1,660 kilometers of total range on the hybrid version, more than 1,000 miles, in a car that starts at under $30,000. That number alone should be the wake-up call. What's hiding underneath the body panels makes it worse for everyone still charging a premium for technology. BYD is now handing out as standard equipment. Making videos like this takes real research, so if you're getting something out of it, tap that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because what's underneath this car isn't clever engineering for its own sake, it's a direct challenge to every legacy automaker that assumed it had another decade before this level of technology showed up at this price. The features that used to define a luxury flagship aren't optional add-ons here, they're the starting point, and that starting point is heading toward Western showrooms faster than most people in this industry are prepared to admit. Let's get into exactly what BYD built with the Seal08 and why it should worry the entire industry, not just Tesla. To understand why the Seal08 looks like this, you have to go back to a fact most Western buyers don't know about BYD at all. The company didn't start out building cars. It started in 1995 as a battery manufacturer, making small rechargeable cells for phones and consumer electronics, and spent the next 2.5 decades becoming one of the largest battery makers on the planet before it ever built a full vehicle. That history matters, because when BYD finally did start making cars, it brought that battery expertise with it instead of buying it from a supplier, the way most legacy brands do. The Seal08 is the clearest expression yet of what that approach looks like at scale. It isn't a chassis with a motor and a battery bolted underneath afterward. The battery, the motors, the suspension, the cooling system, and the driver assistance hardware were engineered together from day one as one integrated platform, not stitched together from parts bought off the shelf from a dozen different suppliers, the way older automakers still do it. BYD builds most of these components in-house, which means it controls the cost, the quality, and how tightly everything works together, instead of negotiating margins with outside vendors at every stage. That single structural difference is the real story underneath this car, and everything else, the range, the suspension, the charging speed, flows directly out of it. It also explains something that confuses a lot of Western observers when they first look at BYD's spec sheet: how a company selling cars this cheap can still afford to include this much hardware. The answer isn't that BYD is losing money on every unit just to buy market share. It's that vertical integration removes an entire layer of supplier markup that every legacy brand still has to pay at every stage, from the battery cells up through the chips that run the driver assistance suite. When you build the battery instead of sourcing it, and engineer the suspension controller instead of licensing it, the savings don't just pad the profit margin, they get reinvested directly back into the spec sheet, which is exactly why a sub-$30,000 sedan can carry hardware that used to require a six-figure badge. Range aside, the first thing that should genuinely alarm a German engineer is what's hiding in the suspension. At 5,150 millimeters long, 1,999 millimeters wide, and riding on a 3,030 millimeter wheelbase, the Seal08 occupies almost exactly the footprint of a BMW 5 Series or a Mercedes E-Class. A car that size, driven through narrow European streets, built centuries before cars existed, should feel like steering a boat. Instead, higher trims come standard, with BYD's DiSus-A system, a closed dual-chamber air suspension that replaces conventional metal springs with sealed air chambers. The onboard computer can stiffen or soften on each wheel independently, in real time. Paired with it is a front-facing camera that scans the road ahead, reading surface changes before the tires ever reach them, so the suspension can adjust its damping in milliseconds, before a pothole or a rough patch is even underneath the car. That's the same basic principle behind the magic carpet ride people associate with Rolls-Royce or Maybach. Technology that has historically been reserved for cars costing well over $100,000. Then there's the rear-wheel steering, standard across the lineup, which turns the rear wheels opposite the fronts at low speed to shrink the effective wheelbase for tight maneuvers, and in the same direction at higher speed for stability during lane changes. The result is a turning radius of just 4.95 meters, tighter than a Volkswagen Golf, a car more than a meter shorter overall. For decades, European luxury brands sold air suspension and rear-wheel steering as five-figure options reserved for their flagship trims. BYD just put both on every version of a car starting under $30,000. Picture that from the point of view of a German product planner who has spent an entire career telling customers that air suspension and rear-wheel steering belong exclusively on the range-topping trim, at a price premium measured in the thousands. Then picture that same planner putting a $29,000 BYD on a lift and finding all of it standard, with nothing held back for an upsell. The suspension tuning also does double duty on comfort. BYD pairs the active damping with cabin technology, specifically aimed at reducing motion sickness on twisty roads, adjusting airflow, lighting, and sound in tandem with how the car is handling the surface underneath it. The kind of detail that shows up in a car engineered as one system rather than assembled from a parts catalog. Then there's the part of this platform built specifically to kill range anxiety for buyers who want the fully electric version instead of the hybrid. Most EVs on the road today run on a 400-volt electrical architecture, which caps how quickly a battery can accept a charge, the equivalent of trying to fill a pool through a garden hose. The Seal08's battery electric variants run on a genuine 800-volt platform, paired with BYD's second-generation Blade battery, the same fundamental approach Porsche used for the Taycan and Hyundai used for the Ioniq 5, except BYD engineered the entire pack, cooling system, and charging controller around sustaining very high current without overheating. In practice, that means the flagship rear-wheel drive version is rated for up to 905 kilometers of range on China's KLTC cycle, and BYD says compatible flash charging infrastructure can add roughly 400 kilometers of range in about 5 minutes, less time than most people spend in a coffee shop line. Compare that to a base Volkswagen ID.7 or BMW i4 on the older 400-volt standard, where a fast charging session to 80% routinely takes close to 30 minutes, with the last stretch past 50% slowing down considerably. That's not an incremental improvement. It's effectively a different category of ownership experience, one where a road trip charging stop starts looking a lot more like a coffee break than a scheduling problem. Tesla proved that owning the charging infrastructure around a car could define an entire brand's reputation. BYD is now proving the same philosophy works applied to the battery pack itself, compressing a 30-minute wait into single digits without needing a dedicated network of its own to do it. BYD also built in dedicated thermal management to protect that speed in cold weather, since battery chemistry typically suffers badly below freezing. Engineering that holds up in a lab is one thing. Engineering that holds up at a random highway rest stop in January is the difference that actually matters to real buyers. BYD also backed its own confidence in this system with the launch offer it attached to early orders. 12 months of free flash charging for the first wave of buyers, plus a year of complimentary coverage for any incident involving the car's autonomous city driving or automated parking features. That's not the kind of guarantee a company attaches to technology it's still nervous about. The performance figures on this platform are almost unfair for the price bracket it competes in. The dual-motor all-wheel drive electric variant produces a combined 510 kilowatts, close to 684 horsepower, and gets from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 3.3 seconds, numbers that would be right at home in a dedicated sports car, not a 5.15-meter family sedan with massaging seats and a panoramic glass roof. For context, a BMW M3, built specifically to chase lap times, needs about 3.5 seconds to do the same sprint. Every Seal08 also ships standard, with the LiDAR-equipped tier of BYD's God's Eye driver assistance suite, supporting both highway and city navigate on autopilot functions, along with automatic emergency braking, features that plenty of Western brands still gate behind a paid software subscription or a top trim level. Structurally, BYD says 86.3% of the body is built from high-strength steel and aluminum alloy, with the most critical impact zones using ultra-high-strength hot-formed steel and cell-to-body construction that integrates the battery pack's upper structure directly into the car's frame for added stiffness. BYD has also put the battery itself through extensive abuse testing, crushing, dropping, submerging, burning, and deliberately short-circuiting cells, reporting no fires or thermal runaway across those trials. 11 airbags come standard, along with acoustic glass for cabin quiet and a cabin comfort mode designed to reduce motion sickness on twisty roads. None of these are numbers most buyers will ever go looking for on a spec sheet, but they matter because of what they represent. BYD treating crash safety and battery integrity the same way it treats horsepower and range, as something to lead with, rather than something to quietly meet the legal minimum on and move past. None of this is presented as an optional package. It's simply what you get. The sensor package behind that God's Eye system backs up the performance claims too. BYD says it pairs a roof-mounted LiDAR unit with a full array of cameras and radar sensors to build a picture of the road that holds up in rain and fog, where camera-only systems from cheaper rivals tend to struggle. And rather than simply disengaging when it hits a scenario it can't confidently handle, the way many driver assistance systems do, BYD says the system is designed to bring the car to a controlled stop using its available sensor data instead of just handing control back to a driver who may not be ready for it. Inside, the flagship treatment continues with dual zero-gravity front seats, offering ventilation, heating, and massage, a fridge console, a panoramic glass roof, a head-up display, and a 50-watt wireless charger. Features that on a Volkswagen ID.7 or a Tesla Model 3 either cost extra or simply aren't offered at any price. Here's where the number needs a little honesty, because the original hype around this car threw around a $45,000 price tag that doesn't match what BYD is actually charging at home. In China, the Seal08 starts at 196,900 yuan, roughly $29,000, and tops out around $35,300 for the best-equipped trim, across all 6 electric and hybrid variants. BYD says it has already banked more than 65,000 orders since deliveries began. That $30,000 starting point is the real headline. Where the higher number comes from is what happens once a car like this tries to cross into a tariff-protected Western market. The European Union currently applies a 17% countervailing duty, specifically on BYD's battery electric imports, stacked on top of the EU's standard 10% vehicle tariff, which is a large part of why BYD's existing Seal sedan sells in Europe for closer to 40,000 to 44,000 euros instead of its Chinese sticker price. Plug-in hybrids, for now, sidestep that specific duty, which is exactly why BYD has been leaning harder into hybrid models like the Seal UDMI across European showrooms, while it races to get a new factory in Hungary online to build electric models locally and avoid the tariff altogether. So, the honest version of this story isn't a $45,000 European luxury sedan, it's a $29,000 Chinese sedan that Western trade policy is actively working to make more expensive, which, if anything, makes the underlying engineering story even more uncomfortable for legacy automakers to sit with. It's also worth noting where this car sits in BYD's own lineup, not as a budget entry but as the new flagship of its Ocean series, positioned above the standard Seal and squared up against the automaker's own Han L. This isn't BYD's cheapest offering, wearing a lot of borrowed technology. It's the top of the range demonstrating what the whole platform philosophy can do when nothing is held back. Step back, and this points to something bigger than one very well-equipped sedan. Legacy European and American automakers have run their business on upselling for decades. You buy the base model with the recognizable badge on the hood, and then the options list does the real work. Air suspension is a $5,000 package. Rear-wheel steering is another few thousand on top. The Advanced Driver Assistance Suite is sometimes a monthly subscription, instead of something you ever actually own. By the time a buyer finishes checking boxes, the car often costs half again what the advertised starting price suggested. That system worked for decades because there was no real alternative, no rival with the manufacturing depth to offer the same technology for meaningfully less. BYD doesn't break that model by discounting existing technology. It breaks it by owning the entire supply chain: the batteries, the motors, the semiconductors, the suspension hardware, and skipping the markup every outside supplier would otherwise add at each step. When you're not paying a separate company's profit margin on every component, you can bundle more technology into the base price and still turn a profit yourself. Features that used to be profit centers for legacy brands become standard equipment for BYD instead. When a buyer can walk into a showroom and drive away with a dual-motor, 800-volt flagship carrying LiDAR, air suspension, and rear-wheel steering for the price of a stripped-down competitor, brand loyalty alone doesn't hold the line. It bends. BYD isn't hypothetically threatening Western markets anymore. It's actively pushing into them, and the numbers back that up. The company overtook Tesla in European vehicle registrations for every month so far this year, driven heavily by plug-in hybrids that dodged the EU's electric-specific tariffs. In the UK, which sits outside the EU's tariff structure entirely, BYD registrations jumped nearly 95% in the first half of this year, with more than 38,000 vehicles hitting British roads. Globally, BYD is targeting somewhere around 1.5 million vehicles sold overseas this year, up sharply from the year before, precisely because its home market in China has turned into what the company itself has described as a brutal price war squeezing domestic margins. None of this means the path west is easy. BYD's brand still doesn't carry the prestige of BMW or Mercedes in most Western markets, and its dealer and service network is still young compared to companies that have had a century to build theirs out. For a purchase, most people expect to own for a decade. That kind of infrastructure matters as much as any spec sheet. But those are problems of presence and trust, not problems of engineering. And they're the kind of gap that time, investment, and a new assembly plant in Hungary can close. The Seal08 is proof that the old assumption, that Western buyers would always pay a premium for badge and history over raw capability, no longer holds automatically. The platform underneath this car is aimed squarely at how legacy automakers make their money, and it's arriving in dealerships whether they're ready or not. Zoom out to the company level, and the pattern gets harder to dismiss as a one-model fluke. BYD passed Tesla to become the world's top-selling battery electric vehicle maker in 2025, and its overseas shipments grew more than 70% year-over-year, even as domestic sales in China cooled under the pressure of that same brutal price war. That split, soft at home, surging abroad, is exactly why models like the Seal08 are engineered from the outset with export markets in mind, rather than as an afterthought bolted on for a regional trim level later. This isn't a one-model story either. Weeks after the Seal08 launched, BYD rolled out the Great Tang, a full-size electric SUV riding on an even newer 1,000-volt architecture with a key LTC range near 950 kilometers and the ability to charge from 10 to 70% in about 5 minutes. And it had already collected more than 150,000 pre-orders before it reached a single showroom. That SUV is slated to reach European and other overseas markets in late 2026 or early 2027, aimed squarely at Mercedes, BMW, Volvo, and Audi. The Seal08 suspension, charging, and software stack aren't a one-off flex. They're the baseline BYD is now rolling out across its entire premium lineup, one model at a time, faster than most legacy planning cycles can respond to. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Can companies that built their entire pricing structure around optional extras actually restructure fast enough to compete with a rival that builds its own batteries, motors, and chips in-house? Or is the gap already too wide to close? A decade ago, the answer would have been an easy, no contest. Right now, with a $29,000 sedan, out-accelerating a BMW M3, and outranging almost anything on the road, that answer isn't obvious anymore. And that uncertainty alone is the real headline. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. There's more waiting on screen right now if you want to keep going. Let me know what you think in the comments.